I wanted to have you. I saw you with Chris Hedges on Brianna's podcast, and I wanted to have you because obviously, most of the focus has been on the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the neocons are huffing and puffing at this. Obviously, there's unfortunately an attack on the airport today, and so far, 12 American soldiers have died from this. But in all of this, there seems to be this continual narrative that everything's groovy, everything's getting back to normal, the jobs are coming back. Uh, I mean, without Cory Bush and certain progressives, it was just assumed that, oh no, we don't need this moratorium anymore for evictions. But I look at the numbers and I don't know what they're talking about. I look at the numbers and I have seen most of the jobs coming back seem to be, retail, hospitality, not exactly great living wage jobs. I see in the coming weeks on September 6th, federal unemployment expansion is set to end. That extra $300. Some states have already ended it, but a lot of states didn't. And I also see, not to trigger, the people who have opinions on COVID, I also see cases surging all over the country in certain states, pediatric hospital beds full with children. So I'd like to ask you, is this the right time to be, discontinuing unemployment or not adding things as the economy is so vulnerable?
Yeah, let me respond by putting it a little bit in context. To assess an economy, in other words, to give some sort of summary judgment about whether an economy is doing well or poorly, getting better, deteriorating, or however you would like to characterize an overall summary, it's a little bit like going, if you allow me a metaphor, going to the doctor and making that standard joke, Doc, how am I doing? And hoping that the doc, after some effort, can give you a sense of how you're doing. Now, suppose the doctor stuck a thermometer in your mouth, read off the temperature of your body, and said, oh, 98.6, fine, you're good. Bye-bye, see you in 3 months or 6 months or next year. Hopefully, you would understand that you need a new doctor because that's not adequate. You really need a doctor to look at all, or at least many, of the important indices of how you're doing. And a good doctor will do that. He'll check you out all over, do some blood tests, look at your urine, all the usual things that people who go to doctors are aware constitute an examination. But suppose the doctor wasn't a doctor. Suppose the doctor was in the business of selling you aspirins. You might then understand, you wouldn't like it, if he did the kind of summary thing that would allow him to say, and therefore you need to take more aspirins. When you ask a political leader, especially one in office, how the economy is doing, it's a little bit like the aspirin story. This politician knows that he or she is going to be held accountable because that's what Americans do. They hold politicians accountable. They shouldn't. It's a mistake, but they do. And therefore, the politician is in a very difficult position. The reality is politicians don't control the economy. They never did. At best, they can nudge it a little more this way, a little that way. But believe me, whatever they do, afterwards, when the camera isn't rolling, they cross their fingers and pray and hope that what they said they were doing for the following reason will actually come to pass. And you know something? Sometimes it does, and often it doesn't. And they've got the press release ready to blame somebody else when it doesn't. So my answer is, when you hear this stuff about the economy recovering, it's people who are looking at an index that seems to be a reasonable basis for saying that. That's all. They're not telling you about all the indices that point the other way. because that would be to undermine their interest in how people see this. So let me make it very concrete. Is unemployment, or did unemployment until recently go down? Yes, it did. And that can be pointed to as something that makes it legitimate to say the economy is in not as bad shape on that as it was 6 or 12 months ago. But if I said to you, okay, well, tell me a little bit about inequality. Well, inequality has gotten markedly worse over the last 6 to 12 months. And it would be easy if you give me 10 minutes, which I know we don't have, but if you did, I would explain to you why inequality is every bit as important a determiner of what's going to happen in the next year or two as unemployment numbers ever were or are. So what we end up seeing is a kind of stupid debate in which the people who need the economy to look good pick out those indices which make that a plausible claim, and the politicians that are out of office and want to get in do the opposite. And the way you can see it is to watch. When Mr. Trump was out of office, he debunked everything that his Democratic predecessor did. And when he was in office, he took credit for everything he debunked in his predecessor. And it's a never-ending game. I don't mean to pick on Mr. Trump, however pleasurable that may be. He's not different from the others in doing this. So if you're asking me my judgment, I look at the mixed bag because indices are always mixed. It's never all one way or all the other. But if you take a look at the broad collection of meaningful indices that I find meaningful, then I would say something as stark to you as the following. This is the worst shape of the American economy that I have seen in my lifetime. The problems we have, the infrastructure that doesn't work, the level of debt. Our corporations are now in debt on a scale we have never seen in the history of this country. Something on the order of 1/5 of large corporations are now called on Wall Street zombie corporations. That word, in this sense, means it's a company whose net revenue, that is the money they get in from which you've subtracted the cost of doing whatever they produce, is not enough to cover their debt. So they are, strictly speaking, defunct. And the only way they can survive, which they do, is by borrowing more money now to cover the interest and amortization of the debts they already have. This is a road into the toilet. You're done here. Our government is in greater debt than it's ever been by all measures. The mass of our people are in levels of debt we have never seen before in our country. Everybody is hooked into everybody by an insane layering of debts upon debts upon debts. If we have an economic downturn, it is going to ramify very quickly. Debts like this are like tinder in a forest. You light a little match somewhere and it goes like gasoline or something because everything is interconnected with this level of debt. We have, for the first time in a century, a serious, well-organized, powerful, rapidly growing competitor. The United States hasn't had that. The Soviet Union was never a competitor of this country. Its economic capabilities were minuscule, but not now anymore. Now we have the People's Republic of China, and that's a very serious competition. How is that going to play out? At this point, you can watch with a certain amount of pathetic empathy as our vice president travels all the way over there to rattle her saber, which is a kind of little rusty, to make noise about the South China Sea, which is over there, and about which the United States can't do anything except try to scare people. And having just lost a war with one of the poorest countries on this planet over 20 years, the persuasiveness of this kind of saber rattling looks pathetic. I'm embarrassed. I read French and German newspapers all the time to see how they look at the world. And it's embarrassing. They're embarrassed for the United States by this display of petulance, of meanness. I mean, you lost. You were driven out. You couldn't do it. You can't do it in Iraq either. You couldn't do it in Vietnam. You fought 3 big wars in Asia and you lost them all. And you're the richest country with the biggest military in the world. And you've been fighting some of the poorest countries on earth and you can't do it. I understand all the complex reasons, but this is a situation in which it looks to me like we have one dead end after another. American companies are still leaving the United States, looking for what? Lower wages in the rest of the world? Still plenty of that going around. But here's the bigger one. The biggest market in the world is the People's Republic of China. If you multiply the number of people there whose income is rising quickly and dramatically and has been for 20 years, it's there, not here. And every MBA student in this country graduating from a business school knows, if he or she knows anything, that if you want to do well as a corporate executive, go where the costs of production are low and where the market is growing the fastest. Hello, that's called China. And that's why they're going, because that's what they were taught to do. And yes, you can tell them it isn't patriotic. They'll listen. They'll shed maybe 2 tears, and then they'll go ahead and do exactly what they've been doing for the last 30 years, while some politician covers it all over with verbiage. So no, pardon my long-winded answer, our economy is not in good shape. It's in really bad shape. And don't be impressed by the big numbers, infrastructure for $3.5 trillion. Is that a big number? Absolutely. But it covers 25 to 30 years of not doing the maintenance of infrastructure that anyone who ever had any infrastructure knows. You neglect your driveway for 30 years, your car will suffer. You can't do that. And if you let that happen, the cost eventually to fix it will be much greater than what it would have cost had you done it periodically the way everybody knows needs to be done. But in our strange political system, politicians do well by going to the people and saying, you see, I didn't raise your taxes. Aren't I wonderful?